I wasn't supposed to be there that night. My colleague Adrian had practically begged me to fill in for him at the Arts for Youth Gala, one of those black tie fundraiser evenings held every spring at the Fairmont Chateau in Ottawa, where the city's donor class gathered to feel good about themselves over $90 glasses of Ontario ice wine. Adrian had come down with something that morning, and I was the only one in our small architecture firm who owned a suit that still fit properly. I said yes because saying no to Adrian was difficult, and because I had nowhere else to be on a Thursday night in late April. I arrived late, just as the seated portion was wrapping up. The main ballroom had opened back up for mingling, and the crowd had that particular looseness that comes 2 hours into an open bar. Louder than it should be, more honest than anyone intended. I found a spot near the far windows that looked out over the canal, grabbed a sparkling water from a passing tray, and did what I was there to do. Represent the firm, collect a few business cards, and leave by 9:30. That was the plan. I heard it before I saw anything. 2 women, standing maybe 4 feet to my left, half hidden behind one of those towering floral arrangements the Fairmont always overdoes. I wasn't eavesdropping. They were just that close, and the one speaking had one of those voices that carries without trying. She always does this, the voice said. Shows up to these things, hoping someone will notice her. Nobody's going to notice her, Barb. She's 34 and she volunteers at a library. What exactly is she bringing to the table here? I didn't move. I kept my eyes on the canal. You're being cruel, the other woman, Barb, apparently said. But she said it quietly, the way someone says something when they don't actually want to stop the conversation. I'm being realistic. She had one serious relationship in the last decade, and the man left because she didn't want to relocate. Didn't want to relocate. She'd rather stay in Ottawa and catalog books than build a life with someone. She's going to be doing these events alone forever, and she knows it. I can see it on her face every time. There was a short pause. Don't be mean, Claudette. I'm not being mean. I'm just not pretending. I set my sparkling water down on the windowsill. I don't entirely know what made me turn around. Maybe it was the particular flatness in that woman's voice. Claudette. The way she said it with no heat at all, which somehow made it worse than if she'd been angry. People say cruel things in anger all the time. But that was something colder. That was someone who had decided a long time ago what her sister was worth, and had stopped revising the estimate. Because it was her sister, I could tell by the way Barb said, "Don't be mean." That particular mix of loyalty and exhaustion that only exists between family. I turned, and I saw her. She was standing about 20 feet away near the silent auction tables, holding a paddle she clearly had no intention of using, looking at a framed photograph of the Gatineau Hills as though she was genuinely interested in it. She was wearing a dark green dress that was understated and entirely right for the room. Her hair was up, a little imperfect in the way that takes either no effort or a great deal of it, and I couldn't tell which. She had the look of someone who had made peace with being somewhere they didn't fully belong, which is its own kind of quiet dignity. Her name, I would find out, was Fern. I walked over. I didn't have a plan. I want to be clear about that. I wasn't doing some calculated kind gesture. I wasn't thinking about Claudette at all in that moment. I just saw a woman standing alone looking at a photograph and thought, I could stand next to her and look at the same photograph. So I did. It's a good one, I said. She glanced at me sideways. The photo? Yeah. Most of the stuff at these auctions is chosen to offend no one, which usually means it offends everyone who has any actual opinion. But this one's honest. She looked back at it. It's just a field and some trees. Exactly. No filter, no golden hour nonsense. Just the hills in November when everything's gray and the light is flat. Someone actually liked this view enough to photograph it. She was quiet for a moment, not uncomfortable quiet, thinking quiet. I grew up near Wakefield, she said. It looks like the drive home in late fall. Does that make you want to bid on it, or does it make it feel too close to home? She almost smiled. Almost. A little of both, maybe. I put out my hand. I'm Hugh. She shook it. Fern. We stood there for another moment, both of us looking at the photograph of the gray Gatineau Hills. Are you here with someone? She asked. Covering for a colleague who got sick. You? She paused just a fraction of a second before answering. My sister invited me. She said it neutrally, but I noticed the pause. I didn't say anything about what I'd overheard. That felt like a door I had no right to open, Instead, I asked if she'd found anything worth bidding on, and she said she'd been looking at a weekend stay at a lodge near Tremblant that she kept talking herself out of, and I said, "What's stopping you?" And she said, "Practically speaking, a solo trip to a ski lodge in May seems slightly absurd." And I said, "Why?" And she looked at me like the answer was obvious, and I said, "I think absurd is underrated." She laughed. A real one. It came out of nowhere, that laugh, and I think it surprised her as much as it did me. We drifted away from the silent auction tables toward a quieter section near the back of the room. There was a small seating area there. Not really meant for sitting, just a few upholstered chairs arranged decoratively, the kind of furniture at events that technically exists but that no one uses. We used it. We sat down and we talked, and the room went on without us. She told me she worked at the Ottawa Public Library, the main branch on Laurier, not cataloging books. She ran their community programming department, which meant she spent her days organizing things like free tax help sessions for newcomers, digital literacy workshops for seniors, and a reading group for adults who had learned English as a second language. She said it with the straightforward matter-of-factness of someone who doesn't need you to be impressed, which, of course, was impressive. "That's real work," I said. "It doesn't pay like real work," she said. But yes. I told her I was an architect, that our firm mostly did residential retrofits and accessible design, making older homes workable for people as they aged. She asked a question I'd never been asked before, which was whether I ever got to see what the homes looked like after the families moved back in. "Sometimes," I said. "We had a family last year, couple in their late 70s. They'd lived in the same house in the Glebe for 40 years. We opened up the main floor, removed some doorways, redid the bathroom entirely. When they came back, they both stood in the kitchen and cried." Fern was quiet for a moment. "That's the whole thing, isn't it?" she said. "That's why you do it." "Yeah," I said. "That's why." I meant to leave by 9:30. It was past 10:15 when I checked my phone for the first time. At some point during the evening, I became aware that someone was watching us. I noticed it the way you notice a change in temperature, gradually, then all at once. A woman across the room, sharp-eyed, standing with Barb, Claudette. She was looking at Fern, the way you look at something you thought you had fully understood and have now been forced to reconsider. I didn't say anything about it to Fern, but I noticed. Later, when the gala was winding down and people were gathering coats, Fern and I ended up standing near the coat check together. Not by plan, the room just narrowed as it emptied, and there we were. "This was not the evening I was expecting," she said. "Better or worse?" She considered it with a seriousness that I found genuinely charming. "Better. Mostly. Mostly, I now have complicated feelings about a photograph I cannot afford. Bid on the Tremblant Lodge instead. I'm not going to bid on a ski lodge." "I know," I said, "but I think you should." She looked at me for a second, just long enough. "Hugh," she said, "I had a nice time tonight. I don't usually have a nice time at these things." And that was almost a goodbye. I could feel it. That particular closing up that happens when someone has decided an evening was complete and good and done. She was reaching for her coat ticket. I said, "Would you want to get coffee sometime?" She stopped. Not in a bad way. More like someone who had been expecting a door to stay closed and it hadn't. "I would need to know," she said carefully, "whether you mean coffee, as in a quick coffee between two people who met at an event, or coffee, as in something you'd be thinking about between now and when it happens." I liked that question. I liked that she asked it. "The second one," I said. She looked at me steadily. Then she picked up her coat from the check and handed me her card. Not a business card, but a small card with just her name and a phone number, the kind of card people used to have. "Text me," she said. "But wait a day. I want to know you thought about it first." And then she was gone. I stood in the lobby of the Fairmont, holding a small card and feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not excitement exactly, more like the sensation of a room you've walked into and realized has better proportions than you expected. I waited 2 days, not a full day and not 3, 2 days, which felt honest. I texted, I thought about it, still want coffee. "Thursday," she replied 11 minutes later, "Thursday works. I know a place on Elgin, nothing fancy." I texted back, "Good. I don't like fancy." She sent back, "I know. You told me the photo was better for being honest." That she'd remembered that she'd held on to it, told me something. We met at a cafe on Elgin Street, that had mismatched chairs and the kind of lighting that doesn't make anyone look good, which meant no one was performing for it. It was a Tuesday. She'd moved Thursday to Tuesday because of a programming conflict at work, and she'd apologized for the change in a way that was actually apologetic rather than performative. I got there first. I ordered a drip coffee. I sat with my back to the wall the way I always do, old habit, and watched the door. When Fern came in, she was wearing a coat, the color of dark mustard, and she had her hair down. She saw me immediately and lifted a hand. Not a wave, just an acknowledgement, like we'd done this before. She ordered a chai latte, which I noted not because it mattered, but because she spent a full 30 seconds deliberating between that and a cortado before deciding, and I found that unreasonably endearing. We talked for 3 hours. Not continuously. We were interrupted twice, once by a friend of hers who came in and clearly wanted to gossip and chat, but read the room correctly and kept it to about 90 seconds. And once, by a very loud group that took over the table adjacent to ours and briefly made conversation difficult. But the interruptions didn't break anything. We just waited them out and picked back up. She told me about growing up in Wakefield. The ferry that runs across the Gatineau River, the way the village turns in autumn. Her father, who ran a small carpentry business and taught her how to read a tape measure before she could ride a bike. She talked about him with a softness that told me he was either gone or far away. I didn't ask which. I told her about growing up in Hamilton, the gap between what the city was supposed to be and what it actually felt like growing up there, the way I'd moved to Ottawa for grad school and never quite moved back. She asked why Ottawa kept me, and I said I didn't entirely know. Maybe because it was a city where being earnest wasn't embarrassing, and she laughed and said that was the most Ottawa thing she'd ever heard someone say. Somewhere around the second hour, she told me about her ex. Not in a raw way, not the kind of oversharing that turns a first coffee into a therapy session. She told me plainly, the way someone tells you about a car accident they've recovered from. He had been offered a position in Calgary 5 years ago. She hadn't wanted to leave. He'd thought she'd change her mind. She hadn't. They'd ended it. Do you regret it? I asked. She thought about it for a moment, a real moment, not a polite pause. I regret the version where things were easier, she said. I don't regret staying. Ottawa is mine. The library is mine. I built something here, and I don't think I would have if I'd gone. But I do think about the version where none of it had to be a choice. I sat with that. I think that's a very honest answer, I said. I've had 5 years to think about it, she said. I'd better have an honest answer by now. She asked me about relationships, and I told her about a long one that ended in my late 20s, mutual, slow, more like a tide going out than a wave breaking. She nodded in a way that said she understood that particular kind of ending. The worst kind, she said. Because you can't be angry about it, I said, and anger would at least have been clean. There was a beat of silence between us that felt, I don't know, like recognition. Like when you say a word you've never said out loud before, and it sounds exactly right. We walked out together around 6:30 in the evening. The light was still in the sky. Ottawa in early May holds onto the light in a way that always surprises me. We stood on Elgin and neither of us moved toward the street. I have a parking spot a block south, she said. I'm on the bus, I said. Stops the same direction. We walked a block together. At the corner of Elgin and Lisgar, she stopped and turned to face me. I want to say something and I want to say it clearly so there's no ambiguity, she said. I waited. I liked this, she said. I don't always like things. I'm particular, and I don't want to be. I don't know. Overly casual about liking it. I thought about Claudette. I thought about the way she'd stood in that ballroom and catalogued her sister like a column of figures that didn't add up. I thought about Fern with her auction paddle she had no intention of using, looking at a photograph of gray hills that reminded her of home. I'm not casual about it either, I said. She looked at me for a moment. Okay, she said. Good. And then she smiled, the full version, not the almost smile from the gala, and said she'd be in touch, and turned south toward her car. I watched her go for exactly the length of time that isn't too long, and then I turned toward my bus stop. It was a Thursday evening in Ottawa. The air still had that end-of-winter sharpness underneath the warmth. Someone 2 blocks over was playing music I could hear, but not quite identify. I had a bus to catch and an inbox full of things I should have looked at hours ago. I didn't think about any of that. I thought about the way she'd said I don't always like things. I'm particular. I thought about how that wasn't a compliment exactly, more like a statement of terms. Here is who I am. Here is what this means, coming from me. The bus came. I got on. I stood the whole ride home because the seats were full and I didn't mind. 2 days later, she texted me. There's a temporary exhibition at the National Gallery I've been meaning to see. Photographs. Nothing fancy. I stared at that last line for about 10 seconds. She remembered. Of course she remembered. I texted back. Saturday afternoon? She replied. Saturday afternoon. I put my phone down and looked at the ceiling of my apartment for a moment. That particular kind of ceiling looking that isn't boredom or worry, but just needing somewhere to put a feeling while you figure out what it is. I was still figuring it out on Saturday when I walked up the steps of the National Gallery on Sussex Drive, and I saw Fern already there, waiting near the entrance, wearing the mustard coat, looking at the building the way she'd looked at that photograph at the gala. Like she was actually seeing it. She heard my footsteps and turned. You came, she said, like maybe part of her hadn't quite believed I would. I thought about it first, I said. She laughed, the real one, sudden and unguarded, and held the door open, and I followed her inside.